if you just think of anybody's story that you can recite verbatim, it's usually them overcoming something.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it was a privileged person overcoming something or somebody that has nothing overcoming something. That's where your story is. And why do we remember that? Because we find commonality with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We find common ground. Like, oh, Ali went through this. Well, I went through something similar, and I'm going through something similar, and he got through it. So, well, if he did this, I can do it too. Right? Like your story, and that's what I want people to understand. Your story provides hope. Right? Like that's literally what it does. If Ali can do this, well, then I think I can do this. So when you're thinking about your story, like you're not writing your story as it has to be perfect and it has to be flawless. Your
Yeah.
adversity, your mistakes, your faults, those are all part of your story. That's how you got here today. Neither of us would be right where we were today if something else would have worked out in the past. Right? Like when you
Yeah.
went
And
to Texas, if you went to the oil bin industry and you loved it and you got drawn into that world, you wouldn't be here today. But because you didn't like something, you saw a different opportunity, you took risk. People thought you were crazy to walk away from the pay to go chase, work in the cannabis industry. But you saw something different. Right? So like every time we make a decision, that's a new place that's a new chapter in our story.
yeah. And I love, speaking of stories, I love the title of your book, Extraordinary People in Ordinary Places. And I have that experience too of meet somebody and just hear a little bit about their story and think, wow, like that is an extraordinary story. You need to write a book, right? Or you need to get that out there and craft it into a story, because so many people out there have these incredible life experiences and aren't sharing their story, which could potentially impact so many people in a positive way if they would just find a way to craft their story. So another question for you, Jerrod: why is it important to not only know but be able to craft your stories in a way that is deliverable for people to be able to know and consume?
I think that's where the lessons come from, right? And you and I've talked about this before, right? Where people use vulnerability as a buzzword all the time now. And sometimes I'll be like, well, people have to earn your vulnerability, right? Like I can't just be vulnerable to the world and expect good things. Like in my belief, like I should be vulnerable to my trusted group of friends because I know they will provide support and lessons and action steps. So to me, when you're crafting your story, like what are you learning from it? Like that's the important thing. Like as you go through it, like what am I learning? Like what mistakes were made? It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think too many times we're tricked into thinking we have to have this perfect story or nobody wants to know, or we have to have this perfect ending. Well, a lot of times sharing the story as you're working through it is fantastic. How many times have you and I had issues or something going on and we're like, oh, dude, thanks for talking to me about it. It made me see it this whole different way now. Well, we weren't through the issue, but we were sharing the story of the issue with you or with each other. And somebody else's perspective helps guide us.
Yeah. So a little off track here, but I'm curious, is there anything limiting to crafting a story about yourself? Is there anything limiting about that?
No, well, only if you don't grow past your story, right? Like only if your story is you were the high school state champion at 18 years old, now you're 40 and you're still wearing your state championship shirt, walking around with your state championship coat, and you haven't accepted that you're 40. You
Sounds like you
know,
may know a guy like that or something.
I don't know. I didn't win no state championship, so it ain't me. Yeah, I think, but your story should always be growing.
Yeah.
Right. Like we constantly get that, Andrea and I on this new life adventure doing shit I've never done before. People are like, you guys are growing so much. Well, we are because we're allowing ourselves to grow.
Yeah.
Right. And that your story grows with you. Right.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like literally none of my story that I would tell you about my life today was what I intended when I was growing up.